Hi, everyone,
Hello.
and welcome to our very first episode. Yes, we talked about this for quite a while.
We have.
Now it's happening.
It is, right?
All right, so let's talk about. Well, would you like to introduce yourself first? Let's tell the audience who we are.
Sure. Well, I'm Mel. I'm an ex-journalist, and that's how we met. We used to be colleagues in the Business Times, and I've after that also been with CNA before. Also, in recent years, been a consultant for public affairs and government relations, and a proud father of 3 young children, and somebody who's very concerned and very much committed to making Singapore a better place for everyone.
Yes, that's great. Yeah, I think we all are. Yeah, I'm Debbie. We were journalists together at the Business Times. Before that, I started my career in journalism at the Straits Times, and then moved to Hong Kong, worked for some global publications there, and then took on a regional editorial role with the Michelin Guide, managing Asia and the Middle East. And I'm a mother of two and an active citizen. That's what I like to call myself. I think it really began when I lived in Hong Kong, right? So I was in Hong Kong like throughout the protests and having front row seats to the unrest that was happening there. And then I remember making a lot of comments, being a typical Singaporean, like, why are you burning down your bins and like destroying your MRT stations, MTR stations? And then my Hong Kong friends said, but you're not Hong Konger, you don't have a stake here. Like, who are you to comment on our policies and our politics? And I think then when I moved home about 2 years ago, post-COVID, I thought, you know what, I am a citizen here and I should think and care about how our country is being run. So yeah, I think it's in the spirit of curiosity, of wanting to know who's running our country, why are they making the decisions they're making, and most of all, what's the impact of these policies on us, you and me, our friends, our family. I think it's in this spirit that we wanted to start this podcast.
David and I reconnected a couple of months ago now, and we realized that we both had similar interests in starting our podcast and more importantly, being concerned about the same issues and wanting to contribute back to public discourse as well.
True, but also different views, which would make it
Absolutely.
fun.
Yeah, and sharing our own experiences on this, and here we are with that.
Yes.
Right. So what shall we talk about this week? I mean, given that we've had quite an eventful week in Singapore local politics and scene.
Yes, for sure. So we've had the Budget 2025 announcement. I think that's the biggest news of the week. Shall we, kick off from there? And yeah. So what stood out to you from this year's announcement?
Well, everyone said it's an election budget, and I think that's expected because given it's an election year, any budget in election year is always heralded as an election budget. But I think it has to be a bit more nuanced than that. Yes, it's a very generous budget, but I think it's also more targeted to different sectors, different segments of society. And I wouldn't go as far as calling it, an election budget. Just to quote one of our former colleagues, Vikram, who wrote in the Straits Times, he called it the Bonanza budget, and I thought that's quite apt, calling it the Bonanza budget, because it's really a lot for everyone in this budget, different segments of society. What stood out for me, I guess, was the amount of assistance given to households in particular and families to cope with the higher cost of living. True that inflation is down, and so some may wonder, like, okay, do we still need that kind of assistance given that inflation is down? But if you look at it, in the last few years, since COVID in particular, cost of living has risen quite a fair bit. I think it's 16% cumulatively risen over the last few years, particularly for certain goods and services.
Yeah, everyone's feeling the pinch for sure.
Exactly. So I think for me that is of great help personally to me and the family, and I'm sure a lot of Singaporeans appreciate that as well. But what about you?
I actually think it's a bit unfair to call it an election budget. And yes, there are a lot of short-term reliefs and band-aids or goodies, as people like to say. But I think that's discrediting a bit because there are also a lot of announcements that were long-term, setting our country up for success with very long-term views. And I think that's the unique thing about the Singapore system, that we can make such long-term plans. So to call it an election budget, I feel, maybe it's a little bit short-sighted. I think there is a lot more in there to unpack than just pulling in votes based on, relieving current pains.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true. I totally agree with you on that. I mean, the point you mentioned about, long-term plans, I think that's great. We saw a lot of infrastructure plans as well and support for that and supporting longer-term ambitions, but also the point you made that we could afford such a budget. I think that is something we need to step back and just appreciate that, where you see countries around the world following austerity measures in government and public spending, we are still in a very fortunate position where we can afford to leverage on such deep resources to make sure that the country is on track, not just with short-term, alleviating short-term pains, but also helping with longer-term plans as well.
Yeah. So the CDC vouchers, what did you think about them? And the SG60 vouchers, there was definitely a lot of handing out there.
There are, and I think I did some back of the envelope calculations. So with the CDC vouchers, the USAFE rebates, the SG60 vouchers, I think at least for my household and my family, that's a couple of months of decent household expenditure covered there. So yeah, I think it goes a long way for people from different spectrums of society. Yeah. Yourself?
Yeah, and it was nice to see. I think the common grouses are usually from the middle to upper income, and people who live in private and landed properties, who often feel they're a little bit left out with a lot of these support, lower income classes. But this time you saw the expansion of the USAVE vouchers, which actually, if you think about it, people who live in private dwellings tend to have bigger houses. So actually, in terms of sustainability, it actually makes a bigger impact if we can get some of these larger dwellings to then pivot to having more sustainable appliances.
Yeah.
And this time the SG60 vouchers are also given out to every household, regardless of dwelling. I do worry though, I think with the SG60 vouchers, that I wonder if we are creating a bit of a handout mentality among Singaporeans. And I've been in a lot of discussions lately about whether Singaporeans should go overseas, whether our people as a talent pool are hungry enough to work overseas, as I'm sure you think and talk about as well with your work with the SG Global Leaders Network, and also whether Singapore businesses can compete when they branch out regionally or globally. And I wonder if having this sort of handout culture then reinforces this sense of entitlement, and the image of Singapore being a nanny state, right? Like the government won't let you fall. If you fall, they'll pick you up. Actually, they'll catch you even before you fall. And this mindset of it's okay, like times may be tough, but the government will always take care of me. I wonder if that saps our hunger a little bit.
Yeah. No, I think there's some important points you made there. Let me try and unpack some of the things you said. I mean, first and foremost, you mentioned the private property, the fact that the budget this year reached out to people in private housing, which was a segment that was often left out. I think that's a sign that the government has been very inclusive this year in reaching out and making sure that everyone benefits from these so-called handouts. I wouldn't call it handouts, but I mean assistance schemes, right? But I think your point about helping households of different sizes and types also deal with appliances. That's great. I mean, I'm looking to go and get an aircon for myself, so this came at the right time. It's good chance for me to upgrade my aircon as well. No, but jokes aside, I think your point about whether it creates a culture of handouts. I mean, it wasn't too long ago that we were criticizing the government for not being generous with society. And I think we have come some way from that. In the last 10, 15 years, I think we've moved in that direction. I don't think we are at that stage where we are creating a crutch mentality in society yet. I think these things, and again, the SG60 voucher was this time around to celebrate 60 years. It's not going to happen every year. Right, but the CDC vouchers, I suppose, are the ones that we have been getting more of, and I suppose that's to help families cope with the cost of living.
And yes, I think you're right that it's good that they call it SG60. It signals it's a one-time payment. I don't know if they'll do an SG61 voucher handout next year, but I mean, I don't think it's necessary, and I think at least it sends a clear signal. It's a one-off.
Yeah. No, I think it's great, and a lot of this I see it as tying back to the Forward SG plan that now Prime Minister launched it last year or the year before last, and where things like being more inclusive as a society, I think we saw elements of that being implemented or rolled out in the budget, and also having stronger families and households. To some extent, also perhaps creating greater national identity or spirit. I think you saw some elements in the budget which would maybe in the longer term lead to that as well. So I'm quite pleased that, when you put it in terms of that plan, I think you see some of those plans now coming into action, and hopefully we'll see more of that being unveiled and unrolled, rolled out. Sorry, in successive budgets.
Yeah,
as well.
definitely. Yeah, so let's talk about families. I guess you are a beneficiary of
I am,
because you
and
have
so are you.
3 kids.
Yeah, but I do benefit from the $500, a voucher that's been given to each child, and I think that goes a long way. I mean, as parents, we want to always look out for things that we can help with in terms of enriching the life and education of our children. So I think that goes a long way towards that. For families like mine with 3 children or more, cumulatively that's a sizable sum to spend on children. Yeah.
Do you think it will encourage more people to consider having the 3rd kid and more?
I don't know. So to me, I mean, I don't think this is necessarily a policy to increase or boost childbirth. I mean, there might be unintended consequences for that. I don't think someone's going to have a child just because you're going to get $500 more, right?
Well, I don't think they should have a child if that's all they're thinking about.
Well, I mean, that's an individual choice, I suppose. But I think, this is probably to help families cope with the journey of parenting. Because, I mean, one of the pain points that, parents, younger parents as well, have been pointing out in the past is the cost of parenting, right? And so it was nice to also see some, action there, or some measures there on curbing and putting a ceiling on childcare fees as well, or early childhood education fees as well. So, and I think that's helpful. I would have liked to see a bit more in terms of, looking at the multi-generational dimension of this. So, yes, there's a lot of support for parents with children, but for a lot of couples, a lot of families, I'm sure you've come across, and certainly for my family as well, the grandparents play an important role as well. A lot of grandparents do have childcare duties for their grandchildren. And I think if down the road, if we want to create an even stronger family unit, I think perhaps a next logical step could be to see also how we could incentivize grandparents who play that caregiver duty to grandchildren as well, because that goes a long way as well.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I feel that personally and very keenly. I've been trying to encourage. My parents have just retired, and I have been trying, begging them, enticing them to come over and take care of my kids. My daughter just started primary 1, which means she has all her afternoons free now, and which means I don't have all my afternoons free now.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to get my parents over, but retirees, they're so busy. They want to do all these other different things. And even when they come over, they're not really sure what to do with her. They're not sure what activities they can do together. Yes, there are classes, but my kids are so young, I don't want to put them in tuition classes and enrichment classes, but I want to find meaningful activities for them and for my parents to, active aging, right? Keep their minds fresh and, dementia prevention and all of that. And if there were not just incentives like financial incentives, but if there were even activities for this intergenerational bonding, where there were activity centers that they could go to, and there would be something for the elderly and for the kids to do together to learn something.
Absolutely.
I think when we have that infrastructure, and then the subsidies and the financial incentives can come in. But today, I think that structure, yes, some people are trying to build it in, different welfare groups are trying to do that, but as a whole, where I think that could be a lot more widespread, and a lot more, I think, at our fingertips. I think today we are ferrying our kids from, point A to point B, and what we lose is the time in between, right, where you're just exhaling, hang out with your friends. And for me, my childhood was spent, you didn't know what to do. You go down to the void deck and you play badminton or you play hide and seek with some friends there. And today we don't have that pockets of time where people can interact, and then bringing in also the grandparents, and grandparenting is lonely as well. We always say parenting is lonely, but maybe grandparents need to meet other grandparents and bring their kids together. So I think, you've raised a really good point.
No, I think that's a great idea. I mean, your last point about how grandparents can also meet other grandparents, because I mean, we can't blame them because in their retirement years, they want to enjoy the fruits of their labor. They want to travel, they want to socialize, they want to meet their friends, do volunteering and whatever enrichment activities they
And
can.
they've raised us already and it's tough enough. They don't want to go through it again.
Exactly. And if they get a chance to do both, kill two birds with one stone, where they get to do things with their grandchildren or even meet other grandparents who are in a similar position, I think that'll be quite interesting. Yeah. Love to see more of that going forward, actually.
Yeah, and maybe, I mean, in terms of financial support, maybe then it's enabling some of these groups, welfare groups, to then come up with these activities.
Yeah.
So while also benefiting the families, but you also boost the amount of providers of these services. I think that's, maybe for budget 2026, that's what I would like to see.
Why not? I think this is definitely something that is the direction that the government is trying to do in terms of building stronger families.
Yeah.
But I'd love to hear your thoughts on the hawker, incentives, given that you've done a lot of work on the food industry. What is your take on that?
So PM Wong announced that he was going to spend $1 billion to upgrade hawker centres over the next 20 to 30 years and also give hawkers, I believe, a one-time rebate of $600 to offset their rental. I think that's a great move. Hawker, anytime we bring up the hawker topic, it's close to the heart of every Singaporean.
Yeah.
It's a difficult line to be in. So I think infrastructure upgrading, great, but also maybe we need to think about the software. And I wonder if some of that funding could go into schemes to encourage more people to stay in the trade for those who are already in it, new joiners to come in, and those, and also how do you scale up if you're already a hawker? I think the success of hawkers have in a way undone the system, right? Like today, if you ask any successful hawker, they say, well, no, I sent my daughter to school. I want her to be a banker and a lawyer. I work so hard so she doesn't have to do this. And so you have this high attrition rate of hawkers. And then you have young hawkers coming in. And I think actually it's a great platform. It's a good first step into trying out an F&B business. But also the rent is relatively lower compared to if you went out if you rented from a commercial landlord.
Yeah.
So it's a good place to start. It's a good sandbox to experiment with new ideas. And we'd like to see more schemes to encourage more hawkers to think of themselves as entrepreneurs and businessmen.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose that's a bit of a mindset shift as well. I mean, you recently wrote a very good piece as well on why restaurants might be shuttering down, and there's a lot of take on the ground that's purely and primarily because of cost pressures, and rental costs often get a lot of attention because of that. But I also think that, from a business point of view, I've spoken to a number of restaurateurs as well who often say that it's also because of the talent crunch, labor crunch as well. And we do see that. I mean, sometimes restaurants struggle with, having the right amount of labor, and, that means longer waiting time for all of us, or, different servicing standards for all of us as well.
Yes,
but I would love to hear your point of view. I mean, do you think more could have been done in this budget in terms of, easing the cost of labor for some industries, including the F&B industry?
Yes, indeed. So I spoke to a lot of F&B operators about this, and today they say the cost of labor can be 40 to 50% of their total cost, where before it would be maybe at best 30%, because they just can't find people. And so they would advertise and no one comes, or fresh grads come and they expect the salary of someone who's worked 5 to 6 years. They want a big title. They want to be head chef. And the owners, the operators, they have to comply, because otherwise there's nobody to run the restaurant, no one to cook, and they can't open the next day. So you're seeing definitely a lot of salary inflation on that front. I know a lot of F&B operators are asking for the quota system to be reconsidered. So there is a quota on foreign labor that you can hire. I believe it's about 35%.
Yeah.
And there are also levies if you hire foreign workers. So all of this is compounding the cost to run an F&B. So yes, I think landlords get a bit of a bad rep, but landlords will be landlords. They'll always want to profit maximize. But I think labor is increasingly a pain point for everyone, and that is hindering. A lot of them want to expand. They want to do different concepts, which is I think the strategy now to deal with the economic slowdown is to expand and maybe into casual concepts, but they just don't have enough people to do it. Another help or relief that I think the industry would have liked to see is for the nightlife industry was the restriction on operating hours, on alcohol sale hours,
Okay.
which then limits your upside And
Right.
when your costs are growing, your labor and your rental costs, but there's a cap to your revenue, then it makes it really hard. And today the operators say, at best, if you get 10% profit margin, that's already really, really good today. Most people average at about 4 to 5%, at which rate you might as well put your money in a bank. Like, why go through all this work, all this thankless task
It
of
is
running
very
an
hard
F&B?
work.
Yeah, working
And-
on weekends, all of that.
Yeah, we've been
Just
seeing a
need-
lot of reports about how the entertainment industry is suffering as well, and even lack of demand. Apparently, younger people don't visit or frequent these places as much as previous generations. So that's quite interesting. A subject for another day. But you mentioned sous chef, and one of the things that came to mind when you were mentioning that was that we saw a boost this time around for Skills Future. What's your take on the Skills Future side of things and the job seeker side of things?
Yeah, so I think, I definitely paid attention to that when PM mentioned it. I think in one of the schemes, they also changed it to immediate credit rather than by reimbursement, which I think will help the F&B industry because it's such a low margin industry and they're often going from month to month. So I think having that immediate injection of funds, of credit will really help. I think another limitation when it comes to the F&B industry is a lot of these labor are transient. So
Yes.
And the common grouse is, my competitor is going to pay my staff $50 more and they're going to move, right? So, and I think there is a minimum amount of time that the employee needs to stay in a company. I believe it's 3 months. And for some of these F&B, they rely a lot on part-time staff or their staff leaves, the turnover is super high. So you can't really maximize on the benefits that they're getting. Another initiative that I think will really help the industry is the Enterprise Compute Initiative, where they're going to provide $150 million to accelerate AI adoption. And I always say that the F&B and the retail industry, they're sitting on mounds of data and they don't use it enough. And I think hopefully with this, it's signaling for more business owners to start thinking about AI and adopting. And particularly for these service industries, I think they're deep in the grind, right? They're thinking about their everyday that they don't have time to look at the longer term strategy.
Yeah.
And perhaps this initiative then gets them to think, okay, like now there will be funds available. How do I use AI to scale up?
Yeah, no, I think on that note, that's a useful point, and I think that's why a lot of business people I've been talking to said they were looking forward to higher quantums for the productivity grant, because given with AI and more sophisticated technology now in play in digitalization, cost of adoption of such technology has also increased. So the cost of transformation has increased as well. So I think that's something that maybe the government needs to keep an eye out on, whether or not some of these schemes are being adopted, and if not, it's cost the hindrance to it, and what more can be done in terms of getting it to be more cost friendly for companies and certainly micro and smaller enterprises as well. But I want to zoom in on a point, Debbie, before we end today as well, on something that actually hits close to heart, and I think this goes back to the entire spirit of the budget, which I said to me ties in nicely with Forward Singapore. And I think one of the things that we often have talked about in Singapore is aspirations. As all of us have aspirations, different sort of aspirations. I mean, when we were growing up in the 90s and maybe the 80s, people famously spoke about the 5 C's. Yeah. I think we moved away from that, to some extent now, maybe more sophisticated and a bit more nuanced than that. But everyone has got aspirations, and that includes housing as well, right? I mean, I grew up in a very humble 3-room HDB flat. My family was from a low-income background where, our household monthly income was $1,000 or less a month. By working hard, we have managed to be in a position now where we lead a much more comfortable life in a private housing, And I think one of the things that I thought was interesting in the budget was the ease scheme, which then meant that seniors who are living in private property now also get assistance and access to making their home a friendlier space. A lot of seniors I hear who have worked hard and then bought private property for themselves, only then to realize that upon reaching a certain age that the property is no longer conducive for them to live, and they find that they have to downgrade, especially when the children have left the nest. And I think this allows them to continue living out their aspirations.
Aging with dignity.
Aging with dignity and with the comforts that they worked hard for. They deserve it because they worked hard for that, right? So I think that's a very powerful signal. But on that end, and again, this is something very personal to me as well, I would have liked to see a bit more support. And it's not something that it's something that can also be visited down the road as well, where we get more job support for more senior or mid to senior level PMETs. We are seeing a wave of job cuts across the board, especially in the PMET sector. And while there have been enhancements to the Skills Future scheme and also encouraging people to take up more courses and being paid while being trained, I mean, unfortunately, some of those are not enough to keep higher to mid-income families, continuing to live the standard of living that they have, right? So I've been in the job market myself since the third quarter of last year, so it's about 7 months now. And it's very difficult. It's very difficult because mid to senior level jobs are getting fewer. Companies are more cost conscious, or at least, freezing up budgets in this very uncertain environment. So for people like me in the job market, it's becoming more difficult to land a job, right? But at the same time, we've also worked hard to reach a certain level of comfort and dignity, as you say, which we don't want to lose, right? So how can we continue to, get support for some of these things, but at the same time also pivoting, through some of the Skills Future schemes to make sure that we remain relevant for the future economy as well. So I think this is something I would have liked to see a bit more assistance on, job seeker assistance for the senior to mid-level PMETs.
I actually think the answer to this lies in building a more robust gig economy. And today we think about gig economy as, the Grab drivers, the, food delivery men.
Yeah.
But there's so much more to that. And we, in my last job as a consumer insights strategist, we talked a lot about, I researched and thought a lot about the future of work and fractional roles.
Yes.
And I really think, maybe this is something we need to grow more of in Singapore for people who are between jobs. You could be fractional CMO for a company for 3 months. And also it would boost small businesses, the SMEs in Singapore, who maybe can't afford to hire someone full-time, but on a project basis for 3 months. They get the expertise at the level they need rather than, hire a fresh grad. It also encourages more workforce participation from women, from caregivers, from parents who maybe want more flexibility in their jobs to maybe then take project role, something on a project basis. And also for seniors, and especially the recently retired seniors who still have skills that are very relevant to the market, but maybe they don't want to work 5 days a week, but they don't want to go from 5 days to nothing at all, to playing mahjong with their friends. And because they are also afraid, right? They also want to keep their minds active. So maybe, having roles, matching companies that maybe want that senior level of experience for 1 day a week, 4 hours a week, and then the senior can, do that, give back to society with all the expertise that they've learned. I myself, because my child started in primary 1, I wanted a fractional role, but I don't find any platforms for looking for these jobs, right? Yes, there's some to empower mothers, but they're very administrative roles, and there's nothing that is on a project basis. And maybe if someone created a fractional LinkedIn where these jobs a platform to match companies seeking this expertise and people seeking a fractional commitment.
Yeah.
But I think then the society needs to change, right? Because how would CPF look like, if you are working on a project basis?
Exactly.
How would insurance look like, where sometimes you have a job and sometimes you don't? So I think a lot of fundamental rethinking needs to go into this. But I feel that the solution, the future direction lies there.
My God, it's like deja vu. I was almost hearing myself speak there because there's a reason why
That's why we're friends.
That's the reason why we're friends. Because I've been really, since I've been in the job market, I've been really delving deep into fractional work. And I think we should really spend some time, besides this episode, going a deeper dive into this. And there are platforms out there. I've come to realize that there are companies and platforms that have been created to help people delve into fractional work as well. But you're right. I think one of the main hindrances now, besides the policy implications, which needs a deeper think, is societal perceptions and attitudes towards it. How do we change our mindsets that fractional work is not just gig work, but more, it's thinking of yourself as an entrepreneur. Right? And I think that kind of shift in mindset, it's something that I'm definitely looking at more seriously as well. Now that I have the bandwidth and the necessity to look into these things. So definitely we should spend some time talking about this down the road.
For one of our next episodes. Speaking of encouraging this culture of entrepreneurship, I definitely think that's a good direction. And I like how PM indicated this in his budget announcement as well, to create an enterprise culture where we can encourage more of these the razors and the grabs, from encouraging a more robust investment system, attracting more of these funds and investors, to maybe giving tax incentives for companies to list on the SGX. But again, I think it needs to start with the mindset, right? Do we have enough innovators to then create the next big startup, the next unicorn of tomorrow? Do we have people who are hungry to create, to solve a problem that not just affects Singaporeans, but the region, the world at large? And this is what it takes, rather than just throwing money at the problem or throwing incentives. It's hunger in our people, and also then hunger in the investment pool. I think even as investors, Singaporeans tend to be very conservative. Our government has typically been very protective of retail investors. There are rules in place. There are like compensations guaranteed, if companies go south because of, the penny stock scandal that happened about a decade ago. So that appetite for risk, Singaporean investors, they like to buy blue chip stocks, the real estate companies, the banks, the very safe ones. So do we have people who are willing to gamble on the startups that may be tomorrow's grab or tomorrow's razor? So I think this is all a mindset shift before we, it's a mindset shift that we all need to adopt. Yeah.
No, I think as parents, you and I have an important role to play in that regard. I mean, how we parent our children to make sure that they grow up with those attitudes and values as well, and the risk appetite, right? So I think that's definitely a longer term issue that Singapore needs to tackle. We've been talking about it for decades now, and it's something that we haven't quite put a finger on yet. And to some extent, I think, that might be the silver bullet that SGX needs, to help create a wider culture where there's risk-taking and
we need kids who don't just study, right? We need them to go out, be active, play sports, go watch the art. And that's why I thought the SG Culture Pass, even though it was a small announcement in the budget, $100 per person, but I think it seeds the idea and it gets people searching for activities that they could do.
Active SG as well.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I think that's a very refreshing approach to boosting the cultural sector, right? Because the previous way and approaches was to give funding to the cultural sector, but now it's left to a more market-led dynamics and mechanism to sort of
yes, you put the choice with the people.
With the people. I thought it's interesting. So what are you going to do with your $100?
I don't know. I need to start looking. But yes, and yes, I completely agree. And I think this also makes our art scene more interesting because now the arts groups need to fight for the dollar, right? Like you can't just do a fun little show that nobody watches and wait for government funding to let you do that. Now you need to think about, did you create good programming? Do you have good marketing campaign around it? How do you pull people in? Because people now have the $100 to spend. They're actively looking, and this is how we create a vibrant culture. Not again, a handout mentality where little arts groups just wait and say, "Oh, I need funding from the government," or the government's not funding me because they don't like what I'm doing. That said, I think there are some programs that are necessary, maybe capturing parts of our history that may not be appealing to the mass audiences that still need to be produced. So I think on both ends, the funding needs to continue.
Sure, there's always a national education element as well that needs a bit of more government support. But I like the fact that we're moving more in a market-driven way for the cultural sector. I mean, I'm looking forward to what the likes of Wild Rice or SRT have, because I'm a theatre fan. So I hope that $100 goes towards that. So let's do one takeaway each from the budget before we end off. What's yours?
Do you want to go first? I need to think about it.
Well, I guess for me, it would be that immediate concerns, which is cost of living, have been addressed. And I think that's a big pain point. I started off by saying it's not an election budget, and that's something that you said as well. But I think that cost of living would have been an election issue. And I think by addressing that, the government has at least taken steps to ensure that that's not a pain point for society, or lesser pain point for society rather. So I think that's definitely a step in the right direction, in terms of making sure that Singaporeans can continue to afford some of the standard of living they've been used to.
Yes, I like that. Yeah. I think for me, it's thinking about the budget and what it's signaling about us as a country to the world. But it's not just
a message to Singaporeans on what we need to start thinking about, but also to the world on what kind of people we are. If you want to, say, invest here, if you want to move here, if you want to retire here, we are people that are constantly upgrading. You know, we're looking into AI. We are people who make time for sports, for cultural pursuits. It's not just, you know, stress. And yes, our education system is very good, but we want to be developed as whole people with passions and opinions. And so if you invest here, this is the work pool you're going to get. It's easier to bring your talent here as well because this is the culture that they will be entering.
Yeah.
And even the quirky little news about, you know, us investing or starting to look into nuclear power as a source of alternative energy. Actually, last year in one of the dialogue sessions, they had already seeded that idea. And I thought it was interesting that this is how long-term, you know, Singapore does its planning. And I like actually, beyond just the announcement, I like the consultative way PM shared the news. It was, we are thinking about it. We're exploring hydrogen. Here are the limits. We're exploring purchasing power. These are the limits.
Yeah.
And that's why we are also considering nuclear power. But we'll do it slowly, considerately. It's not like we've made a decision and, you know, in 2 years we'll tell you. It's like, here we're starting.
Yeah.
And I think that's very much a reflection of the kind of leadership we're going to see from him. Very collaborative, very informative, bringing people along, as he said. So for me, that is the bigger message.
And they were not afraid of thinking outside the box.
Yes.
I mean, who would have thought that nuclear energy was something that we would have explored, you know, as a country? But here we are. You know, it's something that's on the table. So yeah, that's a good point. And I think I like your point about how the signal we are painting to the rest of the world. I think you know, it again ties back to me to Forward SG, that this is the step. You know, this is the direction that Singapore wants to take. That yes, we have had successes, but we're not sitting on our laurels, and there's always areas for improvement, and we're taking some steps to, you know, get us to be on that journey together as a society. Whether you are, you know, from the disability sector, whether you are ex-offenders, whether you're seniors, you're younger,
we care about sustainability
whatsoever. I think there's everyone comes along the journey. So it's to build to a more inclusive society, I suppose.
Yes, I really like that.
Great.
Yes.
Oh, this has been fun.
Yes, I know. I'm looking forward to the next one already.
Yeah, we shan't tell what the next one is about yet. Let's keep them surprised. I think let's keep them guessing.
All right. So if you like this conversation, remember to subscribe and follow us.
Absolutely.
And yeah, till our next conversation.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.